Hello, OGL classmates. I am Tess Caesar, and along with my project partner, Roger, will be one of your presenters this week. For my presentation and discussion prompts, I will be focusing on the birth of scientific study of leadership. When and how did leadership studies enter the realm of science? Who introduced leadership to the scientific discourse of the time? And what were some of their assumptions? I will refer mainly to chapter 5 of Susie Wilson's book, Thinking Differently About Leadership, which profiles the early work of Thomas Carlyle and Sir Francis Galton. For about a century, mid-19th through Hello, OGL classmates. I am Tess Caesar, and along with my project partner, Roger, will be one of your presenters this week. For my presentation and discussion prompts, I will be focusing on the birth of the scientific study of leadership. When and how did leadership studies enter the realm of science? Who introduced leadership to the scientific discourse of the time? And what were some of their assumptions? I will refer mainly to chapter 5 of Susie Wilson's book, Thinking Differently About Leadership, which profiles the early work of Thomas Carlyle and Sir Francis Galton. For about a century, mid-19th through mid-20th century, leadership discourse centered mainly around nature versus nurture debate, with a great majority favoring the theory that leadership is an inherent personal trait and not one that can be taught or influenced by one's environment. But how to prove it and why? Why prove it? At this point in time, leadership philosophers sought to legitimize the study of leadership by applying elements of the natural sciences. Just as biologists would categorize characteristics to identify a newly defined species of moth, early leadership scientists set out to define leadership by a set of specific traits. And as we've learned throughout this course, to gain a critical perspective on anything, we have to step back and view the whole. What social, political, cultural events were happening at the time these theories were popularized, and what key assumptions were made by those developing these theories. Before I tackle those questions, let's meet the man Susie Wilson credits with the birth of leadership science. Thomas Carlyle was a British historian, satirist, writer, and philosopher. He moved the discourse of the study of leadership from the parlors of the well-to-do to the lecture circuit with his great man thesis, in which he argued that heroic men should be identified, promoted, and revered by followers in order for society to maintain its natural balance. He identified 6 categories of hero greatness, but really put hero king above all others. And the king Carlyle admired most was British General and Lord Protector of the Commonwealth of England, Oliver Cromwell. There are similarities between Carlyle's heroic leaders and Aristotle's magnanimous man. The difference is that Carlyle, unlike Aristotle, recognized the contradictions of the world with which the hero had to deal and stated that all heroes will be flawed. Their heroism lies not in their moral perfection, but in how they respond to these contradictions. Then there was Sir Francis Galton. Galton took the study of leadership traits into the genetic sphere in his book, Hereditary Genius. It was the first social scientific attempt to study genius and greatness. Galton advocated for the role of genetic traits and hereditary factors in producing great leaders and promoted eugenics as a way to ensure the future stability of humanity. Today, he may be looked at as the crazy uncle that we don't talk about at Thanksgiving, but at the time, and again, we have to consider what was happening at the time and what assumptions they brought to their thinking. He was considered a pioneer in the scientific study of leadership. So let's talk about what was going on in the mid-19th century that might have influenced Carlyle and Galton in their approaches to the study of leadership. According to Wilson, quote, Carlyle's thinking was profoundly influenced by the 19th century English Romantic movement, this being a reaction to what was perceived as the negative impacts of industrialization on society and nature, end quote. The Romantic and Carlyle wanted to return to a world where the love of nature was more valued than the love of machines, and one that valued and accepted what he called the natural inequity of men. This ran counter to the increasing favor for democratic and egalitarian modes of government at the time. And to add to this, the rise of social Darwinism, and you can see how Carlyle and Galton might have felt bolstered by Darwin's theories as they gave them some credibility for their own. But keep in mind that like Aristotle, these men were in the upper echelons of society and social rank. Of course, they felt there was a natural order that explained how they came to their status, and that this arrangement worked best for all of society. And now they wanted to see if they could prove it scientifically. Leadership theorists set about creating scientific studies grounded in the emerging methodologies of social science. Carlyle's methodologies included an analysis of biographies of a leader's life and works, physiognomic assessments, that is to say, he studied the faces of leaders from portraits to glean their leadership characteristics, and assessments of speaking style. This data was assembled to create a complete assessment of one's leadership traits. Not surprisingly, Carlyle's assessment of Oliver Cromwell reveals Cromwell to be an ideal modern leader. Even though Carlyle's trait assessment laid the groundwork for the later leadership trait studies, his work was criticized for being heavily influenced by his romantic notions, rendering his studies too informal a form of scientific discourse. Francis Galton, on the other hand, focused his studies on inherited traits and used statistical analysis, which is still a method of choice today. He was also the first to introduce the use of questionnaires and surveys for collecting data on human communities. His studies demonstrated more scientific rigor than Carlyle's. However, Galton's discredited eugenics movement ultimately impacted how his other studies were perceived. From these two early examples of the scientific study of leadership, we can see how key assumptions of the philosophers and social, cultural, and political events influenced not only their respective methodologies, but their very reasons for developing and testing their theories. As examiners of leadership studies, this is a good reminder of what can be revealed by applying a critical perspective. So my questions to you this week are: one, what are some new traits of leadership that have emerged in the last decade or two, or that you would like to see emerge? And what assumptions do you bring to that process? And question two, do you have a Cromwell, or someone who you think embodies leadership characteristics, or ones that you would like to see emulated by more people that would make society, your organization, or the world more harmonious and productive? I look forward to seeing responses. If you have any questions about this presentation, please feel free to reach out to me through the inbox. Thank you so much.